How do you think podcast helps introverted people build a personal brand and network?
It's a mutual collaboration and a partnership to add more.
Where are you now with the podcast?
The podcast has always helped me be a person of authority. The podcast now is a reflection of our challenges. I thought, okay, let me set up this e-commerce podcast.
What led you into e-commerce?
I had realized fairly quickly in working as a consultant and as a marketing agency that e-commerce was the most exciting space to be at. Google represents about 70 or 80% of website traffic. People are aware of me in the industry, and I start to learn more because I realized I didn't really know the full cojones, 360 view of running an e-commerce business. E-commerce is not necessarily a huge topic. If you have like a community of 300 people, maybe one person will be into e-commerce from a seller side. It's not that huge as a podcast. Meeting people in person is a very quick way to...
Kunle, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus. We're going to talk about a lot of things today. First thing, I'm actually quite interested because you're the first host that we interview about an industry that we haven't touched upon yet in Podcast Gurus. It's e-commerce. Can you tell me the story of the 2X e-commerce podcast, please?
Thank you very much for having me, Johnny. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity. E-commerce is very interesting. I'm sure every listener has bought something on the internet in the last month at the very least. It's so much part of culture now. When I started in 2014, I was really I was listening to podcasts. I was listening to a lot of e-commerce podcasts at the time because I was getting into a new industry. So I was in a broader digital marketing industry. I don't want to really bore people who are not into, this, all of this stuff, but I wanted to specialize. And the first protocol, just because of how fast things were moving, the first port of call was, who are the voices and where can I learn this from an audio, maybe even visual perspective? But audio was more my preferred means of learning the industry. So I started to listen to a number of podcasts, and I said, look, I could, and then I started to listen to other like business related podcasts by podcasters speaking about podcasting and the opportunities podcasting has actually, opened up to them. So I thought, okay, what better way to get into this industry than podcasting? So at the time, I reached out to my early network of colleagues in the e-commerce space, and I got them on as guest on the podcast. I was working as an affiliate for I remember an online diamond business. They're selling jewelry basically, and my websites, my network of websites had generated quite a number of sales for this company, and so I reached out to and I'd been speaking with the owner anyway because he was giving me tips and, making adjustments based on feedback I was giving him. And we built a relationship off the back of that. And he was my first guest on the podcast. So I'd recorded about 7 or so episodes for that, to start out back in 2014. So it's just to build the momentum. And it went terrifically well. That conversation went well. I went on to speak to other founders. I went on to speak to other experts. And I just started to build my knowledge on e-commerce and build my network on e-commerce. While all that was happening, I was just essentially looking from it was a hobby. It was out of pocket. It was a marketing cost to my company. But I just thoroughly enjoyed it due to the fact that I'm naturally introverted, right? And having this coming out of your comfort zone every week, speaking with someone new was just the best way to strengthen that position. And it was also a good way of saying, okay, I'm not just going to rely on events and conferences to meet new people. I will just be, as a result, creating really good content for my audience, but at the same time, helping other experts in the industry to amplify their voice and their message. And that's how I started in 2014. Things have obviously changed and accelerated. We're in 2024 now, and you can imagine. So that's my long-winded answer to your question on how I started.
Absolutely love it. We're going to dig into this. There is lots to unpack. So first of all, why e-commerce? Because you were doing this marketing gig for that jewelry company, right? But so did you have a foot in e-commerce yourself and you wanted to network further in that industry? Or why not specializing, for instance, in the affiliate marketing space? Because if that's what you were doing, like what led you into e-commerce?
It's a very good question. So if I rewind back to 2006 to 2011, I was in this space in digital marketing called search marketing. So it was very much about optimizing websites for Google and essentially optimizing websites for Google. Google represents about 70 or 80% of website traffic. And by 2011, I had realized fairly quickly in 2011, working as a consultant and as a marketing agency, that e-commerce was the most exciting space to be at. It just gave me a buzz. I organized some in-person events, and a lot of the good feedback from those in-person events were from like e-commerce operators. I just found them more like heroes, in my opinion, business heroes, in the sense that they didn't go and get a job. They took destiny into their own hands, and they were selling, invisibly. A lot of their customers did not know them in person. I just found it. And if I rewind back, the very first way I made money in the UK was through e-commerce, like through eBay. Right. So I just had that affinity for e-commerce. I kind of felt what they're doing. I felt they had a lot more responsibility doing e-commerce. So I literally, when I was in university, I literally didn't have all the funds to fund my university, my master's degree. And the way I went through university was I would go into eBay. I'll go into to websites, online from Hong Kong. I will buy clothes, bags, put them on eBay. I will go into pound shops here in the UK. I'll buy DVDs that are £1 and I'll sell them for £12, £7, £8 on eBay. I used to do that regularly, and I'd make, I don't know, like 200, 300, 500, sometimes £1,000 a week. So I didn't, obviously that was gross, right? So I didn't need to go and get a job to support my tuition. And the other thing was like, because I didn't need a job, I spent a lot of time, online, and I couldn't, I also I didn't have access to student loan, right? So I was an international student, and just coming in, that was what saved me. But what happened was that because I wanted to get a work visa, I now had to go into services rather than continue my entrepreneurship, role. There was no visa for me as an entrepreneur. So I had to attach myself to a company, and I go into SEO. But like eventually that beginning caught up with me in podcasting, right. And also like in service render. So I continued the service business, but to only e-commerce businesses. And I thought, okay, let me set up this e-commerce podcast so people are aware of me in the industry. And I start to learn more because I realized I didn't really know the full cojones, 360 view of running an e-commerce business. So that's how 2X e-commerce was essentially born.
Oh, I love it. Man, so there are so many things I want to ask you. First of all, kudos for the hustling, man. That must have been crazy. Going to the Hong Kong websites, pawn shops, reselling that on eBay, crazy. With a friend of mine, we had a similar gig when we were at the beginning of our university years. We were doing exactly that with chairs. We were buying them on Alibaba and reselling them on Amazon, or the equivalent of the eBay, but in France. Quite funny. Well, I didn't take the route of e-commerce in the end. So for the in-person events that you organized, Kunle, I'm actually interested in that. Why do you come up with such a thing? And the reason I'm asking this question is you touched upon introversion, and I want to get back to this in a second, but introverted, as you said, the point of e-commerce is not to be in person, right? It's to sell online. You basically never see your people. And so how do you come around just creating in-person events and like gathering e-commerce people?
Okay, so I wanted to make money. That's the long and short of it. I wanted to diversify, the income for my agency. And the in-person events were in form of training programs. So I'll send out an invite to my database, and most of the people who turn up will be e-commerce people.
Okay.
And these were paid events, they'd be like 6 hours, 9 hours, events. It's really taking you through the process of like SEO for e-commerce. And at the end of the day, there'd be like many of the more established e-tailers would be like, look, I brought my head of IT here, I brought my head of e-commerce here, I brought my head of marketing here. And I want you to work with them. I didn't really come here I came here to learn, obviously, from a top level, but I wanted to meet you. Who are you?
Wow.
So that's how I realized it very early that meeting people in person is a very quick way to build trust and essentially reinforce your reputation online. I don't do that enough right now, but I should be doing it more than what I do. But it's just because I don't live in London anymore. I live in the countryside, so a lot of my trips into London are very, very deliberate and planned. And so there's just not much opportunities to meet people in person. But it's right now to hack, it's to really accelerate relationships.
But so let's get back to this introversion thing then, Kunle, because everything you're describing so far to me is would be typical of non-introverted people. So I had another guest mention that she was introverted, and that's why she started the podcast. But I'd like to dig a little bit into this with you. Why do you think podcast as a medium is a good way to go about, well, developing a personal brand, getting in touch with people, whilst being introverted? Like, why did you choose that one instead of something else? And then let me double down on this question by saying, but you end up organizing in-person events as well. So, like, how do you think podcast helps introverted people build a personal brand and network, basically?
Good question. Yeah. Are you into any sports?
Yes, I'm into gym.
You go to the gym. How often do you go to the gym?
So I try 4 times a week. Realistically, it's 3.5 times a week.
What do you do in the gym?
Basic split training by myself, just a pair of earphones, hardcore music, sometimes a podcast, and just hitting the gym for 60 minutes.
So you do reps and then you do sets, right?
Correct. I do hyper sets, actually. Supersets.
Okay, cool. I also do that, but for really good stuff. I swim. Also, I just started swimming again. And the key thing really to get really good at this is repetition.
100%.
So if you realize you're an introvert, for me, if I really dig deep, I just have social anxiety in person. So I get to situations in which you and I might have been speaking for 3 months, and I meet you randomly, and I forget your. Not like I forget your name. My anxiety makes me forget your name, and after we meet, right, I'll be like, "Yeah, your name's Julian." I'm like, "Oh wow," because like I'm heightened and thinking about all sorts of, things at that point in time, in human contact. So for me, lockdown was amazing.
Wow.
Like, it was just great because everybody was leveled down, right? It was a fantastic time for me, and even the quality of activities I was engaged in were just so high, both virtually and offline with my family. So, coming from that, having a podcast and having that commitment, like today is Tuesday, is my recording day, that I'm going to be speaking to someone new. There's going to be a value exchange. What do I mean by the value exchange? I mean that with the value exchange, I am giving whoever is coming on my podcast an opportunity to reach out to get their voice heard by my audience. and they're giving me their precious time. So it's not a thing that I'm begging or I'm helping. It's a mutual collaboration and a partnership to add more value, out there. And that's my philosophy, coming from an introverted or social anxiety person. There's some people who have been, really difficult, who've come on my podcast. I just didn't air it. I just messaged them at the end of the conversation, if it reached the end, and was like, I'm sorry, I didn't really get the really good vibes on here.
Really?
Yeah. There've been times when, they feel like they're doing me a favor, or, just the quality of the answers, I'm not even, they wouldn't do my audience. It's a disservice to my audience from my point of view if I push that episode out, and I'll just be honest with them and be like, look, I didn't really get, the vibes I was expecting. I don't actually put it that way, but I'm not going to be recording, unfortunately. I'm not going to be publishing, unfortunately.
Wow. How do they react to this? We hardly had once that case in 2 years of podcasting with 2 different shows. So we don't really know how the guest typically reacts, because they're like, hey, I've given you, as you said, right, my precious time, probably a pre-brief, probably a recording time. I was counting on that episode.
How do they react? So it's varied, but no one's been rude. Okay. Some people just understood right off the bat. Let's say they just didn't deliver the necessary value, or the what's the best word to put? They essentially, I wouldn't say lie, but they exaggerated in what they said they accomplished. And then imagine being found out on a podcast, for instance. This happens in business, right? We're talking business here, and we're talking about maybe numbers or certain techniques, and they're kind of like found out. And I'll be like, I might record it to the end, or I might just stop it right there and say, you know what, I'm already feeling this. Someone's been like, what do you mean? But they just relent. And then there are other instances whereby maybe it's a two-way, like I have 2 guests, and I'll never do this again, by the way. This is real. This was a real one. These guys were, so I'm a published author with a publisher called Kunle Campbell, and these guys they'd also released a book in our industry through the same publisher. So I was so excited to speak with them. But it turned out that there's this boss, he's like the CEO of this business, and he hired like a personal assistant writer, like someone who writes for him. So he couldn't speak about his book per se. So she then was in that conversation, and then there were questions I was asking, and then it was almost like I was in a meeting, a normal internal meeting where he's just asking out to very well-spoken lady, and, very accomplished man, I would like to think. And he was just giving me his bravado. There's a lot of ego in that space. I thought, no, there's no way my audience can. I endured to the end because my obviously they're under my publishers. My publishers didn't ask me to interview them, by the way. So I just endured, out of the respect, and then I really had a conversation with myself over meditation, and I thought, this is not. So I just reached out to their agency, and the thing is that most of the guests don't come direct. They come through agencies, or we look for them. So it's easier, to give our message. Oh yeah. It's a given. So I remember as young as 7 on a Saturday afternoon, having absolutely nothing to do. I was a very hyperactive child, and I just lying down on the floor, feet on the wall or feet on the ground, and closing my eyes and just imagining I'm going through space with nothingness, but at the same time stability. And those are like my first memories of like meditation as a child. So when I'd rediscovered meditation in my 20s, I'd say in my 30s, when I rediscovered meditation in my 30s, I reconnected with that, which is that calm. But yeah, it's the reason I practice various kinds of meditation. I started out with breathing meditation, which is really good. There's focus meditation, which is amazing. You can focus either in your forehead, focus on an object. You can focus on fire, just on a candle light, right?
Yeah.
You can focus at night, as in like the focus meditation is really amazing. At the same time, breathing meditation is really relaxing, right? And it essentially gives me more space, it creates more space in my head. It gives me what I call divine downloads.
Mm-hmm.
So divine downloads are just like ideas. Then also I do feel, when I'm going back to working out, I feel that if you can make your workout also meditative. In fact, it's very powerful because really ask any really good personal trainer. One of the bedrocks of a good workout is your breathing. If you know the timing of your breathing through a workout, you manage oxygen much better, you oxygenate your muscles much better, and you just get more throughput, right? And so that rhythm of breath can be meditative and just holistic for you, and it would still get you the benefits of meditation. Not many people know that. So you could run and be meditative.
Interesting.
So yeah, I believe in meditation. I believe in self-strength. That's the power of meditation, as against extrinsic relying on authorities, on experts, on outsiders to give you intuition. The intuition is within, and you need to dig deep through meditation to connect to that, to that higher source of energy, rather than getting energy from outside. And that again links to my being an introvert. I really believe that there's power could be that we're almost, like nuclear reactors, in our brains, as when we create energy, literally.
I started meditation again since a few weeks now. My focus has never been higher in the last 6 months. The way I see meditation as well is I start the day with meditation, and it allows you to just start the day calm. Well, a lot of people will just grab their phone, which I used to do over the last few months. And having that serenity, that peace for I just do breathing meditation, right? Nothing too complex, but about 10 minutes every day. And what it allows me to do is being so much more focused and in the moment, especially during podcast interviews, which I find just game changer. So, Kunle, couldn't agree more with everything you said. Let's get back into that self-strength topic in a couple of minutes, because I want to hear your take on a few things. Just to finish the story on the podcast and the business. If one looks at your LinkedIn profile, they will see that there are plenty of stuff. So what has been the red line of marketing, affiliate marketing? I mean, if I start from the beginning, even eBay, podcasting in the e-commerce, event organization, what has been the kind of, conducting line of everything? How has your podcast benefited you business-wise? And maybe even vice versa. How has the business benefited the podcast? Where are you now with the podcast? What's kind of the story here?
Okay, that's a really good question. So the podcast is, as of today, we have published 498 episodes. Obviously, some are repeat, some are cut out, but according to the to the numbering in our transistor. It's that we've had millions of downloads. Obviously, as you can imagine, e-commerce is not necessarily a huge topic. Not if you have like a community of, I don't know, 300 people, maybe one person will be into e-commerce from a seller side. So it's not that huge, as a podcast. But that being said, the podcast has always helped me be a person of authority, in a way. So this is a business podcast. It's not a personal development podcast. It's a business podcast. It's aimed at operators. So if you're already running your e-commerce business, the kind of conversations you get from my podcast will help you become a better seller, become a better operator, become a better marketer for your business. That's just the ethos. But it's unlike some other podcasts that are in the e-commerce space. Some will teach you how to get started. Mine's more, you're established now, and you're facing some established business, challenges. And so it cuts the audience, well. And I did it intentionally because at the time, I only wanted to speak with potential people that can help e-commerce businesses so that the listener base could be potential customers for my marketing agency. And it worked. It worked a lot. It actually even got me my book, the e-commerce. I started to run virtual events that got my book. So where we are now is I no longer offer marketing services to businesses. I operate and run a company called Octillion Capital Partners alongside a co-founder called Ayodisu. What we do is we buy good for you e-commerce first businesses, consumer brands in the beauty and skincare or food and beverage space, and we essentially grow these businesses. So the podcast now is a reflection of our challenges. So we speak a lot about operations for now. So I think the podcast for me, just to answer your question, is more a reflection of where I am personally in the e-commerce space. And so I attract guests that will help me as a business. And because of that, my audience are becoming more like me. So rather than just marketing agencies that are serving the e-commerce businesses, a few founders, we're getting more founder listeners who are going through the same challenges I'm going through. So I'm taking the audience with me. Obviously, over time, you're going to let go of some. I've actually met someone at an event. I was invited to a dinner in London. It was a dinner for like an ecosystem of operators, bankers. We had SaaS providers there. It was a really nice, very, very nice, well put. And at the time, Silicon Valley Bank was supporting it there. Then I wonder. So I was there. And a very accomplished e-commerce guy comes to me. He runs, what does he run? He runs a huge business on costumes, like, Halloween costumes and all dress-up costumes. So the chap comes over to me and he says, "Hey, Kunle, how are you?" I'm like, "Hi." Social anxiety. I probably know this guy, but I don't know him. I don't know his name. Hello. He said, "You host 2X e-commerce, right?" I was like, yeah, I do. I mentioned it already. He said, "I used to listen to your podcast." Like, yeah, but I don't really listen to podcasts that much. I said, "Are you sure? Get me your phone." Because we had a bit of wine, I was like, let's see your subscribe, your Apple podcast, and let's see the shows that you're subscribed to. He shows me 2X. Actually, I didn't ask him. He just showed me. And he's like, it really did a lot for me. He then mentioned one episode I interviewed of another founder that's doing exactly what he's doing, but in America. And he said that moment when he listened to it got him digging into that industry. Now he's running a multi-million-pound I'm talking about tens of millions per annum business. So I left that really positive because I know there are many other people like him that have just gained, they had the aha moment by listening to an episode of my podcast that inspired them to just change the trajectory of their lives. So intrinsically, you have, those people, and you want to meet those people, don't you, in an event, and you don't want them, and if you have regular events, which I've not done, the way I'd like to do it, you meet them and you bridge those relationships long term, and it's not serendipitous like this. You actually create, a very intentional network of, people that you've helped and will help you, further down. And if you feel so good when you've helped someone, there's no other feeling that comes close to the feeling of help. So to cut the long story short, the podcast started with me in 2014, trying to just understand the industry, to understand e-commerce as a concept, getting really intelligent people on. And then slowly, after the first 100, 200 episodes, people started to associate me as an expert in the e-commerce industry. I was very excited about it. They started to associate me with many, many other personalities, which is really, really good. And then from a business perspective, when it came to hiring and say my profile came up and another person's, profile came up, the fact that I have a podcast tended to just give me a heads up, as in it gave the perception I was more vested in e-commerce than, the alternative. I mean, it opened up, I had a 5-year contract, I think, with Meta, and this was like a freelance contract where I'll come to Meta. They'll fly me anywhere in the world where they had like training with the media industry. And I'll teach just 1 hour concept of like checkout flows, e-commerce checkout flows. And I'm not like I'm a checkout flow expert, but I became a checkout flow expert through them. I knew about checkout flows. I was just helping them streamline their checkout flows because it was very convoluted, because they were using like the old newspaper subscription models in e-commerce. And it was just, to me, it was simple, but it was like life-changing for them. So through Meta, we worked for many years. There were like stints, like every quarter took me to Brazil, Australia, North America. I've been to Palo Alto a number of times. And this is all from like the podcast. The podcast got me to fly to Estonia to attend an event. Actually, I paid for that event, but I just wanted to know more about like conversion rate optimization, which was very, very important in e-commerce. And then that then led me to writing about conversion rate optimization. And I was writing for free for publication. And then the guy who found out about me for Meta just read one of the articles and then reached out to me and reached out to like 3 other people. And then when it came to the decision, he was like, I just seemed more credible. And then that was it. So it just gives you more exposure, right? If anything, it gives you more exposure. And that's been the journey. And then from then on, I was using it with my agency on the side. It was then COVID happened. When COVID happened, I used the podcast to create 2 virtual events, very, very strong virtual events, which attracted the industry. And then somebody from my publishers caught on the event and then made me a book offer with my publishers. That's how I wrote my book about e-commerce. And then when I started Octillion, when I joined Octillion with Ayo, it's the many guests who've come on my podcast that we now sort of use their service, or we have partnership, agreements. We try out, they're giving us free services. So it's like if you're in an industry, you need a voice, and that voice could be a podcast. The voice could be a newsletter. Newsletters are strong, by the way. It could be events. It could be posting content in a certain way on a regular basis. I know a lady who's into e-commerce. I think she works for like an agency type thing. She's young, started out, but what she does is every Thursday or Friday on LinkedIn, she just publishes all the headlines related to e-commerce in a very, very, very easy to digest way. But it just marks down all the headlines you as an e-commerce executive need to know. And she's building her reputation there. She started out with 10 likes. Now, each of them gets 200-300 likes. Imagine the reach, she's having. So it's really giving. So my thoughts about all of this is, when you try and give more, and podcasting is just one way to give more. Why give more? When you give more, you attract more, and you shouldn't look at it mathematically, right? But when you naturally, like, I'd rather, if I go attend an event, I'd rather be a speaker than just a guest, because initially I was very comfortable being a guest, just being an audience, a member of the audience. But first time I was given the opportunity to be a speaker, I just loved it. I loved the adrenaline. I loved the fact that I had more responsibility and purpose there within that space, and I was bringing value and just enjoying that process without thinking about the outcome. The outcomes then come from the fact that it's one-to-many, and so you're spreading, the probability of good opportunity coming just because you have more exposure. That happens. But when you enjoy that process of, oh, wow, we're building something, we're doing something now, and, this is my contribution to it. I don't know, for me, it just gives me joy. Like in COVID, I was a member of our community organization. I was helping people out with shopping, just coming together with the community, set up a WhatsApp group around our community. It's like, and then it was just a few of us. So again, I think it's feeding my introvertedness, because there were just few of us making decisions. And then I essentially really got to know them well. And yeah, it felt better than just sheepishly following a crowd in a big audience. I'd rather be the few than be the many. Because I find peace in fewer people. There's less to worry about, right?
Let me throw you a curveball here, Kunle. One of my best friend and housemate actually is an e-commerce guy. He has founded a website, sells Tesla accessories. The way I see it and the way I understand this world is, it's a forever race against having the best traffic acquisition techniques, having the best conversion rate, having the least abundant carts, having the most checkout page checkout. Like it's always about who's going to optimize their website and their organic and paid for traffic to sell more. By having this podcast, by giving that much into the industry, aren't you giving away the very secrets, or at least a competitive advantage that you may have to the industry? So other people are successful. I'm voluntarily being the devil's advocate here because I think that's a good thing. But from a very personal and business approach standpoint, isn't it counterproductive for your website?
Okay, so first of all, I don't see my assets as websites. And the way e-commerce is now, it's just not stores anymore. E-commerce is about actually birthing a personality in the form of a brand that's separate from you. Right? When you think about Coke, you don't think about... You have certain... it helps you with your dopamine. It makes you feel good. The red just does something to you. You link it to Christmas due to the Santa Claus, hijack. I want you, when you think about Red Bull, you think about adrenaline. You think about, extreme sports. So you want to let people feel something when you when you put a brand out there and when they come across your brand, so that longer term, so long as your product is good and it has utility it has high utility, you build community. And when you build community, you have a real asset, because that community does two things. One, they will regularly buy from you because they believe in you. They believe in your product. They believe in what you do. And two, they will tell other people about you because they also believe in you. So it's about belief, right? And so everything you put out there has to link back to your brand identity and all the aspects of branding. So with all that, so there are quantitative and qualitative things. The quantitative things are what we discussed, the numbers. But the qualitative aspects of a brand are very, very important to build something that transcends a marketplace, that transcends normal numbers, and really connects with consumers. So that's my take. And then with regards to giving people the secret sauce, I think the sky is big enough for everybody, number one. Number two, we can't take it all. We're not competing against Amazon, right? So this is not like we're running Amazon and then we're trying to defend our turf. 1 in 5, so 50, for every £1 spent on the internet and e-commerce, 50p is spent, and in many European countries, this is the same, and the US is spent on Amazon. We're like a grain of salt. Our operations are a grain of salt in e-commerce. So me speaking about it might hinder my competitors in maybe the food space for one of our brands, and for specifically in our brand, but it's not necessarily giving our secret sauce, how we talk, how we make our customers feel, about their brand, because at the end of the day, it's down to feelings. The feelings dictate those actions they take, on your website. So that neuro level, is very, very, very important, and it's where most people sort of fail. And the reason why is a lot of people set up their e-commerce business is just to make money. Your e-commerce business, setting up an e-commerce business, and I know it works for many, 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 many people, but if you set up a business with a purpose, then you can get to the feeling bit very, very easily and grow community very fast. And that's where the Gymshark story is so powerful, so because they built it based on a need to change, a perception and build a true community of people who lift, who go to the gym, of young people. And many people can relate with that brand, and that's how they blew up. So, yeah, that's, and on my podcast, we talk about this. In my book, I talk about this very topic. And it's, once you get that fundamental right and understand how people think, it's really down to the psychology, of consumers, then the moves you make, the way you turn up in the market, the words you say will indeed, essentially bolster your growth and acceleration. So there's a lot of power in the words. That's one thing I've learned in the last few years. Power of words are very important, and also the medium in which those words come out from. Is the person trustable? So yeah. I would say then the other thing finally is the craftsmanship. Craftsmanship still is rewarded, in the world. And if you put more in the craft of the products that you're putting to market, then consumers will make those associations of quality, and high quality always breeds trust with your product. So you can actually engineer a lot of that feeling in the detail you put in your product and your packaging. So when they relate with it, they know you truly care for them. So yeah, that's what I would say, and that's hard to replicate.
Why the focus on good for you? I'd like to dig a little bit to this. You have literally gold on your fingers because you can decide to launch a product and just sell it online through the different techniques you've learned throughout the years. Why this refocus on the good for you? What's behind that?
I actually love that gold analogy. So the good for you came from a very personal story. But before that, let me start out with Octillion. So with Octillion, we're like, we need to raise money. Why do we need to raise money? We need to raise money to buy businesses. So we go to the market, we put up a deck. I bring my expertise that, look, I'm the best person you can keep your funds with or entrust your funds with. From an e-commerce perspective, IOs will be really good with finance and operations. If we synergize, we'll be able to build a portfolio of good for you brands. Turned up, not good for you, we just a portfolio of e-commerce brands. We're very broad. And there was a conversation we had with one of a potential investors, and he was not going to invest. But I was like, you guys are great, love you, we're not investing, but you need to choose something you're building, because if you're too general here, it just, you don't have any way of differentiating your offering. And I'm coming across many pitches like yourselves. You need to figure out what vertical. So if you want to focus on like camping, say I was like an ex-executive at some camping brand, and I had e-commerce experience, and I went there and say, look, I want to focus on outdoor, on consolidating outdoor and just buying outdoor businesses or growing outdoor, then they can understand. So I was like, okay, cool. So we get back, and I was like, what's your personal story? Whatever we choose has to link to our personal story. And we go deep. Actually hire a brand consultant, personal brand consultant who actually, he's not just a personal brand, he actually helps to engineer corporation images of corporations with their employees. Just sometimes there's a disconnect between the way employees view the companies they work for. So he sort of gives soul again. So he came, I was like looking for the soul of our business. So it turns out that IO, he played pro football.
Okay.
To a certain level. He was in an academy or something in his late teens. And and he from there it picked up like very, very clear health, habits and all of that stuff. And then for me, I'd fallen really ill at 29/30. Inflammation disease. I'd always struggled with my weight. And when I mean my weight, more my weight composition than anything else, in terms of like my muscle to fat ratio was always off. And I always felt for me that my health was outside of my control.
Okay.
And having fallen really ill and taking the meds and got me better, realizing the effects of the meds, longer term, I started to look more holistic, ways of figuring out how to solve stuff. So I'm very concerned about, the kind of, stuff I put in my body. So off the back of that, we were like, we came on the good for you, but like, we don't want to sell poisons. We don't want to sell high sugar, anything with added sugar. We don't want to sell anything with seed oils. We want to sell, we're looking at actually deals in our portfolio. And we're like, what deal really excites us? Actually, yeah. So after like 150K, we as in like 150 capital raise calls.
Right.
We're like, what deal actually excites us? What deal really excites us? And we came across a brand called Lean Caffeine, and we loved the founder's story. He had lost his dad to dementia.
Okay.
And he started this brand to help people who wanted to go down the intermittent fasting route, people on the ketogenic diet, people on the low carb, diet or carb cycling diet, or Mediterranean diet, and people who want to really to actually take control of their lives. And that in of itself, we looked at the ethos there, we looked at all of the other things I said, and we came up with a focus. We were like, it's going to be food and beverages. We like food and beverage space. We like, the skincare and beauty space. And there's no way we'll buy and be selling poisons, to people. And we thought, okay, let's go down this good for you route. It's not easy going in the good for you route, because you're now a lot of people in a lot of brands in the food and beverage space. All they're optimizing is for taste. And the taste then sort of dictates people coming in terms of the repetition of business. For us, we have that challenge, and then we have the ingredient challenge. So it's double trouble. It's a double challenge, but it's worth it. It's really, really, really worth it. I've seen some people who sell collagen in the e-commerce space, and it's just not good. It's not good. There are all sorts of additives, in there with the collagen. I was like, why? But they're doing well. It makes your business grow faster, a lot more faster. But long term, I don't know. It's for me, it's not the thing to do.
Yeah, you're not doing any good to your industry, your clients, the planet. So that might be something people want to consider. Kunle, talk to me about carrying a message through the podcast. I mean, in our previous call, you mentioned something around potentially starting another podcast, which has quite a different approach and objectives than your current one. Can you talk to us a bit about this?
Yeah, so I'm over 40, and since I had my first kid 13 years ago, 2011, so you can figure out my age. And since then, between then and now, I've had 2 other children, and I always think that, because I used to read like a lot of encyclopedias and old books growing up, and I'd read people's writings from the 18th century, 19th century. I loved Dickens, for instance, and I liked a little bit of Shakespeare, but not a huge fan. But I always think about, would my grandchildren benefit from what I'm doing today, right now? And what my soul tells me is not really, because it's so contemporary. But the overarching story, my overarching story coming in from Lagos to the UK, settling in Oxford, that in of itself is great. That the history, there, that story would be good for them. But I was thinking about the message, and if you think about, legacy definitely comes financially, materially. Legacy, the financial legacy you put in. Very importantly, your reputation is legacy. In the community, it's very, very, very most important. Very, very important. And then the word you leave. If people want to get into knowing who you are, I think the word you leave, and with podcasting now, I personally think that a topic that will never go out of date will be health and wellness. And at the same time, if you look at the health and wellness literature in the 19th century, it just feels so weird, right? It feels so weird. There are a few scientists who endured the test of time, like Charles Darwin, but or a few people who have discovered significant, significant medical technology, whether it's the X-ray or penicillin, for instance. You have those moments in science. But this is like holistic science, this is bro science to a lot of people, right? But health and wellness is very, very important. And I like to share how I take care of my own, or take control of my own, health protocol. I take blood test every 3 months. I've been pre-diabetic in the past, and my blood sugar is well normal. I refused to take medication because I thought it was masking a lifestyle issue. And I would love to share that with more people. When I'm seeing people in the sauna and at the gym and explaining this to them, they're like, "Wow, it's interesting," and we get along. So I think a lot more people need to benefit from my story, whether or not it has legs to endure for years and years, as whether it to be like an established protocol. I don't care or know if that's possible, but I'd also like to interview other. Now that I'm putting out there, I now need to do this. It's said in public, but similarly minded, people who are much more advanced and in the space, in the holistic, and longevity space. I really think that movement activity is very important. We can be very optimal, versions of ourselves. So yeah, that may be a direction in which I would be, going along. I might just, one day say, I don't have much to say again in e-commerce. It's been 10 years. Who knows? But maybe I'd have a co-host this time, and I would love to have it in person, so in a studio in person, really, really have that, connection with the guests. I'd love to do that. So it's all in my head now. I want to take it out. I'll be taking it out soon, trying to execute on that. But let's see. Who knows, what the next 1 year will.
Absolutely love that. Kunle, there is one question that we ask everybody at the end of those interviews. 3 podcasts that you listen to yourself that you'd like to share with me and with the audience. What would you recommend? And of course, I cannot say the 2x e-commerce podcast. We'll put it in the show notes. Do not worry about it. Like 3 podcasts that you listen to yourself that you'd like to share.
3 podcasts. 3 podcasts. I'm just looking through my Spotify right now. I listen to JRE clips, so Joe Rogan, just the clips. The episodes are just way too long. They take a lot of my time. I don't really dig that. Another one I listen to is let me see. Funny enough, I'm not hugely so what happens for me is like podcasts have seasons for me. So what I'm listening to now is, again, not too heavy. The Higher Self with Danny Morell, and the more recent one, one I listened to with my kids in the car, is called Like You, Mindfulness for Kids. It's a perpetual motion one. And then there's another one, I just threw it in one when I don't want to think. I just want to sort of enjoy the rhythm. You must sort of experience this. You should wear headphones when you listen to this podcast. And it just takes you through all sorts of sounds and clips. It's called GABA, G-A-B-A, by Adam Matten. It's almost meditative. It's wild, GABA. It's wild. So I picked up GABA again. I'm more an audiobooks guy now, as in I listen to audiobooks a lot rather than podcast.
So that's 3 new podcasts that I will have to listen to. And so what's your current audiobook that you're listening to right now then, Kunle?
So the audiobook I'm listening to is The Wealth Money Can't Buy.
Oh, I like that.
Wealth Money Can't Buy, it's called The 8 Hidden Habits to Live Your Richest Life. It's by a chap called Robin Sharma. And then I also, at the same time, I'm listening to another one on Audible. It's called The DNA Way. It's by Kashif Khan. Very, very good book.
Absolutely amazing. Definitely some, food for thoughts and podcasts for the ears. Well, audio content for the ears. Kunle, thank you so much for coming on Podcast Gurus.
Thank you, Julian.